My name is Bob Babbitt, and welcome to Babbittville Classic Rewind, a collection of my favorite interviews with some of the legends of endurance sports that have aired over the past 3 decades. I'm hoping you will enjoy these interviews as much as I do. As always, endurance lives here. A Lewis and Clark type of thing where people were learning about what the body can handle out there for 8, 10, 12, 15, 17, upwards of 24 hours. Before that, people really had no idea.
Yes, and it established a platform from which we ultimately at Wide World of Sports explored other extreme endurance events, with the 100-yard or 100-mile foot races, I should say.
Sure, Western States.
We Western States,
yes.
100 2 or 3 times, and then of course the ultimate for us, which was the race across America.
Right.
An exercise in sleep deprivation. When I look at all of the reality television that's so overwhelmingly popular today, and particularly things like Survivor and the Great Race, that's the race across America. That's the telecast we put on the air in the early 1980s, documenting how it wasn't just a sports or competitive experience, it was a life experience. And these people were matching their ability to get across the country from one side to another, in addition to a bicycle race. So it's amazing to me to see how enormously popular this stuff is. We first did it on Wide World of Sports.
Right, and what's interesting about it, the running part or the cycling part was secondary to the interaction between the cyclist and his crew and watching this person sort of collapse. Am I going to try to do this whole thing without sleeping? And watching the different athletes, the different philosophies, and seeing quite frankly, what Survivor has made its living off of is people collapsing and people having problems with each other, and you see
Julie
that.
Moss.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they made their living off of Julie Moss.
Right.
Or off of Lon Haldeman and Susan Notarangelo having a spat, which happened on Race Across America.
Absolutely.
And that kind of thing is magic when you're doing one of these spontaneous reality programs, because let's face it, most of life is mundane.
Right.
It's the little moments of drama that we cling to.
Well, and quite frankly, if Julie Moss had just trotted across the finish line and won the race, we wouldn't be talking about her. Nobody remembers Robin Beck from 80 or Linda Sweeney. No.
I mean, that was one of the most amazing spontaneous dramas I've ever been a party to in sports, because in most television sports production situations, you have a hunch what kind of story it is that you're looking for.
Right.
In some situations, pro forma going in what the storyline is, and it either plays itself out one way or another. But we were still, finding our way. That was the move from Oahu to Kauai. To the Big Island.
To Big Island,
new atmospheric conditions,
right.
New kind of course, et cetera, and much, much bigger field. Huge proliferation of competitors by that point, and and lo and behold, late in the day, I get this walkie-talkie report that there's a woman leading who's in enormous physical distress, and there's an in-house debate among the people on our telecast team as to exactly what was the nature of Julie's distress. Was it pure dehydration? Was it dehydration accompanied by a variety of other symptoms?
Sure.
Was she having her period? Did she have an upset stomach? Et cetera, et cetera. All of these things were rife for speculation as she closed in toward the finish line, and then you had the amazing moment when she collapsed on the road, and the officials, quite correctly, good, because the event was still evolving in that regard too, but the volunteer officials eventually figured out that they should not aid her.
Right.
That they didn't want to give her a competitive advantage, and no one who saw it will forget the moment when Kathleen McCartney kind of looks at the finish tape as if to say, what is that doing there?
Really? I'm in second place. Why is the tape still there?
Exactly. It was confusing to her.
What's fascinating about Julie's whole situation is as she's coming down the street there, and people have watched this tape over and over and over again, and when you see her, she gets to a point where she's walking, and you go, okay, Julie, just walk to the finish. Then she tries to run again and goes down. When you were able to preview some of the video before you guys did voiceover on it, were you just amazed at what you were seeing?
No, the video was astonishing. The trying to communicate to executives in New York
Yes.
What this particular wide world was going to be like and what it was going to be about was like speaking a foreign language, trying to get them to understand how the event needed to be communicated. I mean, I had been fighting a battle with wide world authorities for years about the question of whether a live call of some sort shouldn't be done. I mean,
right.
when I first went out there and saw the event, I said, guys, this thing takes, 10, 11, 12 hours. You can't pretend to do some live call. It's a documentary.
Right.
It's got to be narrated as a documentary. It's got to be done in past tense. And then when the Julie Moss thing came along, all of that gets thrown into a cocktail, and the executives are saying, wait a minute, this is way too much drama for us to simply have you doing a past tense documentary call. And I'm saying to them, yes, but it took place in January.
We're showing this
airing it in June. I mean, and it literally came down to, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
So my compromise was to get them to allow me simply not to talk, to allow as much of the segment as was possible to play in the clear. I mean, I fought with them word by word about how many words would be in. Well, we want you to say this here. No, I don't want to say it. It's right there in the picture, Right. Well, you've got to tell them why she's... No, I don't. Let them speculate the way we did. Let them, it became a whole philosophical argument in the department, and I was pleased at the end that the commentary is relatively sparse, that it doesn't fake a live call, that it's a legitimate, sort of... It does a certain justice to the reality of what happened.
Yeah, and the other side of... with Julie, the whole idea of the Ironman at that point was obviously there was a bunch of fruitcake type people doing this ridiculous event, but the average person at home took from that coverage that winning is not what Ironman's about, that getting to that finish line is winning, and anybody, if this young gal who's crawling on all fours can get to the line, you could get to the line.
Well, I thought about it again at the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics in the case of the ice dancing team from Canada, Marc Peltier
sure.
and Jamie Salé. Who won?
Right.
In the first go-round, okay, they didn't get the gold medal, but they got the attention, they got the
sure.
acclaim, they
right.
got the love, they got everything that could possibly have come out of it. Between Julie and Kathleen, who won?
Yeah, I know. Julie,
few will remember Kathleen's name,
right.
and I'm sure that she's not uncomfortable with that.
No.
As opposed to the number of people who will remember Julie.
Right. And the number of people who, quite frankly, were motivated to get into the sport. And if we look at pro football and we look at 1958 and Alan Amici's touchdown as putting football on the map, quite frankly, Julie Moss and her finish put the sport of triathlon on the map.
Well, absolutely, and what was critical about Julie was she was visibly and demonstrably more about will than skill. I mean, she didn't look like some world-class athlete who is remote to the average person. She looked like the girl next door, and here she was involved in this titanic struggle at the head of a pack in an event that had already begun to draw people from all over the world. It galvanized a lot of people to understand, hey, what the mind will conceive, the body can achieve. That's been the guiding mantra of the whole expansion of ultra-endurance sports, and it's never been more typified than by what Julie was trying to do.
Hey, Jim, can you hold on for a second? We'll take a quick break and come back.
Yeah.
Jim Lampley, one of the legends of broadcasting. We're going to take a quick time out and come right back. My special guest this evening, Jim Lampley, who was there in the early days of Ironman, 1980, 1981, 1982, when Julie Moss was leading until the last 100 yards, collapsed. Kathleen McCartney passed her. Probably one of the most dramatic moments, and probably in Wild World of Sports history, right, Jim?
Oh, certainly, yeah. That would be, I think, among the top 5 or 10 memorable moments ever on Wide World of Sports.
What's interesting is that event happened a full 2 years before the marathon became an event for women in the Olympics. Up until that point, the 1500 was the longest event women were allowed to participate in, and obviously they could do a marathon if they could do the Ironman.
I had the privilege of being in the Olympic Stadium in Los Angeles and interviewing Joan Benoit at the finish of that first Olympic women's marathon. And I actually was doing other things at that Olympics other than track and field. I was the host of swimming, and I was also the host of the late night show, but I was specifically assigned to go interview Joni at the end of that first marathon, largely because the Julie Moss experience and some others had given me at that time an identification with women's sports that was regarded as valuable in conducting that particular interview.
That's interesting that they would make that connection.
There's a connection, yeah.
Well, and obviously I think that what happened with the Ironman and just watching that women could do a lot more, and there was no reason that something like the marathon couldn't be accomplished by a woman.
Well, that whole period of time was a watershed for women in a variety of ways, particularly in endurance sports, I think, and certainly there are a lot of people whose efforts go into it. I remember my friend Kathy Switzer
yes.
came out and worked with us a couple times on the Ironman telecast, and Kathy Switzer was a pioneer and pushed the Boston Marathon to open up to women. Diana Nyad was involved in the early Ironman telecasts and a variety of other ultra-endurance telecasts at ABC Sports, and obviously her long-distance swims had helped to break barriers for women's consciousness in terms of what they could achieve, particularly in endurance events.
Was the Julie Moss, Kathleen McCartney finish, was that the moment that sticks out the most for you from your Ironman years?
You know, I actually, and everybody else, and any viewer, of course, would remember mostly the drama of that. But my memories of the triathlon, when first it comes to my mind, are far more general, and I tend to think more of that first one on Oahu.
Right.
It was really more interesting for me to go and see it for the first time, because by the time the Julie Moss thing occurs, I've gotten over the shock value of the fact that, you know, Joe and Jill from Topeka can do this if
right.
they push themselves and condition and train and extend themselves in the right way. That is something I'm accustomed to by 1982, and a lot of the viewing audience that tuned in for that drama might not yet have been totally over the shock value of that. I remember Dave Scott and John Howard going against each other in that first race on Oahu, and thinking how brave these guys were, because they were doing something about which we didn't really know the immediate effects at that time.
Well, and yeah, you really didn't know what would happen to their bodies from doing this, and quite frankly, the other side of that is 1980. It's televised for the first time, and really, you think about lumberjack events and things that ABC Wild World of Sports telecast at the time. 20 years later, the event's triathlon is in the Olympics for the first time.
It was supposed to be a 10-minute report.
Right.
The very first time around. And, that's another one. We came back from Oahu and we said, guys, it's not just because of the pictures, but this has to be bigger than 10 minutes. It has to be an entire Wide World of Sports. It ought to be a special edition. You ought to extend it. People should feel the length of the thing. And it took us a long time to win that battle, but we got it done. I mean, from the very beginning, from the first moment we set foot on that island to begin to learn about the event, there were battles to be fought in the corporate offices in New York to begin to gain the kind of exposure that would accelerate the growth of ultra-endurance events. And so many, just so many memorable moments to me from the entire breadth of the experience. I mean, probably the most profound for me of all of the things that I remember from the whole adventure of covering ultra-endurance events as they proliferated early on was that first night of the very first race across America. There were only 4 people in the first race across
sure.
America: Michael Shermer, John Marino,
John Howard,
Haldeman, and John Howard.
Right.
And we didn't know what they were going to do. We didn't really have a clue. I don't think they really knew what the plan was going to be once they got out there. And I remember we were out in the desert around midnight after a start at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was watching Lon Haldeman go under an overpass near Blythe. And I turned to Susan Notarangelo's girlfriend, who was the crew chief at that time, that first time around, and I said, "When is Lon going to sleep?" And she looked at me and she said, "Sleep? We're going to New York." "Don't you want to go to New York?" And I remember walking back to the telecast truck and said, "Guys, I'm not sure they're going to sleep."
Yeah.
What are we going to do? We got a camera crew to take care of out here. 2 of them, as a matter of fact.
And we've got to sleep.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, how are we going to keep up if they just go and go and go? And, there were days, many days, when we didn't sleep. We'd just go all day because they did. We had to also.
Sure.
So, all of it. The Western States 100, I couldn't believe that the first time I saw it. The fact that people would run 100 miles without ever setting foot on level ground.
Right.
Unfathomable. And when I learned what they do at Leadville with the altitude and the heat of that was insane too. But the triathlon came to define it all. The triathlon came to be the central event. It's the one with the most glamour and resonance, and so many people have benefited so much from just the fitness and the adventure of it. It's become, I think, a major revolution in sports.
Was there ever a period where you thought, I'd sort of like to try this thing?
Well, I was in good shape. I was in pretty good shape in 1980 when I went out there, and all through the early 80s, I was a runner.
Right.
I never ran a marathon. I ran half marathons. I'm pretty sure I could have run a marathon had I tried to do it. But biking, swimming, nah, no possible way. A 2.5-mile swim in the ocean was something that really didn't interest me at all.
Yeah. It's a lot of looking at fish and going, when is this thing over?
There's a reason they put it first.
Yeah, and the bike thing was, it's a little overrated. Your butt hurts, your hands hurt.
The amazing thing is, as I learned as I went along, probably the easiest link for the triathlete, for the tremendously well-conditioned triathletes, is the bike ride, because 112.5 miles is not all that enormous a bike ride in comparison to a 2.5-mile ocean swim or a 26-mile run.
Right. Well, unless the wind's howling, which always happens.
Which became a big factor over on the Big Island.
Hey, Jim, thank you so much for taking so much time.
Me, Bob.
And I'd love to do it again when you get a chance.
Sure.
All right, Jim Lampley, one of the legends of broadcasting, taking some time to talk about the Ironman Triathlon. He was the commentator, 1980, 81, 82, and 83. Our house band, Off by One, their album is available now. You can go pick it up anywhere you like. And again, big thank you to Neil Finn, 25th anniversary of America's Finest City Half Marathon. Congratulations to him and to all of you. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, see ya.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of Babbittville Classic Rewind. And don't forget to check out our huge library of interviews with the most decorated triathletes in history on Breakfast with Bob.
Ask me what I want to be, and I will say I will be